from SCNR. West Virginia, Mississippi to defy 3-year-old voter access executive order from Biden. West Virginia Secretary of State said, "We will emphatically not give up our state's duty to register voters to the federal government, nor will we accept voter registration forms collected by federal agents." March 7th, 2021. Shout out to Timcast members. This was on the Timcast IRL member show that this was brought up to us. Executive order. Do you guys know which user it was? You want to pull the name up?
I forget her name, but it was Shane Wilder retweeted
Well, one of you find it, and then I'll read this.
Yeah.
This is an executive order from March 7th, 2021, which says, "By the authority vested in me as president by the Constitution of the United States of America, I hereby order as follows. The right to vote is a foundation of American democracy. Free and fair elections that reflect the will of the people must be protected and defended. But many Americans, especially people of color, confront significant obstacles to exercising that fundamental right. These obstacles include difficulties with voter registration, lack of elected information, and barriers to access polling places, blah, 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 blah." He was going to say a bunch of critical race theory stuff and woke stuff. Now, here's what gets interesting. He says the head of each agency shall evaluate ways in which the agency can, as appropriate and consistent with applicable law, promote voter registration and voter participation. The effort shall include the consideration of ways to provide relevant information, facilitate seamless transition of agencies' websites, distributing voter registration and vote by mail ballot application forms, and providing access to applicable state online, yada, yada. Where it gets really interesting is, I believe, Section 5, whether consistent with applicable law, any identity documents issued by the agency to members of the public can be issued in a form that satisfies state voter identification laws. To simplify, agency is defined legally in this executive order as any federal executive office, except a couple of them. But for the most part, any one of them. This executive order says the agencies will start sending out voter registration forms and mail-in voting applications to people in various states, and then it will help them produce IDs to get them to vote. This is the federal government directly intervening in state-level registration processes.
It was Dancing Okapi that
shout out.
brought it up.
Now this is where it's important. Texas said when the Social Security Administration released these huge numbers every other week, hundreds of thousands of people registering to vote without IDs. Texas says, we have no idea what you're talking about. This is not true. It may be the federal government collecting these IDs, and that makes me substantially more concerned. These are illegal immigrants that are registering to vote. And I didn't think that at first when we saw, let me pull up the HAVV. So this is the Help America Vote Verification. Are you familiar with this,
yes,
Dennis?
Yeah.
So what we've found and what's been going around, let's grab the latest from March 30th, and we can see if Texas's numbers are here. 225,000 verification requests, 190,000 matches. Texas says, this is clearly wrong. We don't know what this is. Well, now we may know what it is. It may be, and again, not sure, but if Texas is saying, their Secretary of State said, we do not know what this number is, it's clearly an error. Or it could be the federal government has been registering people to vote and taking those forms and requesting information from the SSA to verify the numbers are in the database. It may be the federal government has not yet delivered these registrations to the state, which is where we end up with this story from SCNR. When West Virginia says we will not accept voter registration forms collected by federal agents, it may be that they've collected millions and have not yet turned them into the state.
Well, let's go back to the Constitution. You know, earlier we had a discussion about how the Fourth Amendment is being violated by FISA, and how FISA ought to be struck down because the Fourth Amendment has to take precedence. Now here, we're looking at the 10th Amendment. And while those who watch your show are familiar with it, I'll just read it. Again, the 10th Amendment, adopted the same year that the Fourth Amendment was, the Bill of Rights in 1791. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively, or to the people. This is an area that the states are responsible for. The federal government doesn't have a proper role in this. And so West Virginia and Mississippi are insisting on the 10th Amendment rights that the states have. Now, there's another thing here, Tim. I don't want to see Social Security is one thing, but I don't want to see anything that's tantamount to a national identification card.
Agreed 100%.
Oh, but real ID is here.
I know, but I'm saying there's a danger there. It's a privacy issue, and it's also an issue of the government gathering in a central database information about everyone.
I actually already have my national ID card. I'm not going to show it on air, but it's here in my wallet. It is issued by the United States Department of State, and it is a North American identification card.
Yeah.
I don't want to.
I know they're moving towards that in order to be able to use to travel by air, for example. Mm-hmm. But I just want to say that this, to me, a national ID card, demanding it across the country, I find that the government once again gaining too much power.
Well, they're trying.
I interrupted you, Tim. What were you saying? You had what? What did you have?
I have a federal ID.
Okay, what is it exactly?
It's a U.S. passport card. It's an ID issued by. It's an ID card issued by the federal government that is good in Canada and Mexico
I got
and
the
the United
same
States.
thing.
But it's one thing. It's one thing to elect to do that. To make it mandatory is another thing.
But how do you make it mandatory?
You don't. I mean, you could by ordering it.
So
the government could order it.
Well, but they don't need to do it. What they'll do is, whenever somebody gets a passport or an ID, they'll ask you, "Hey, would you like this one as well?" It's much more convenient. And look at what they're doing in Australia right now. You know what's going on in Australia? They're eliminating cash from banks. You go to a bank now, and we can't give you any cash. Sorry. Why? Nobody uses it.
They're actually removing ATMs, as far as I can tell, according to the news. 1,000, I don't know how many, but from Eastern Australia.
Well, if you eliminate cash and then you move to, let's say, a federal
Digital
central
currency.
bank digital currency.
Bad news.
Yep.
Just, again, a form of tyranny.
And what if the power goes out? What do they think is going on?
Then they own you.
It doesn't.
And you will say, "Please, sir, can I have another piece of bread?"
Ian, they don't care.
See, if you don't
power
have,
goes
if
out.
you mentioned, was it you, Phil, mentioned creation of Federal Reserve?
Yeah, well, Ian was talking about it. But
Ian
we were
was
talking
about
it.
but starting with the creation of Federal Reserve, which privatized the money supply and put the banks in charge of it. It's interesting. The same year was when the government created the federal income tax. So it used to be that the government could meet its needs without going into debt. Then the government created debt, and money became debt, and the income tax was a way of retiring it. And then you have people who are paying their money into a system, and then it requires more and more taxes to feed this growing military machine. This is a bad system.
Keep going.
So what I'm getting at is that we have a moment of reckoning coming in the United States over who are we as a nation. If you go back to, as I mentioned earlier, go back to the Declaration of Independence, it's very clear that right at the beginning, Jefferson said, look, we have a right to change the kind of government we have. And just because this is basically the form that we've had for all these years doesn't mean it's not time to inspect the basic terms under which this government exists. Mm-hmm. And that we not be forced to accept as it's evolving in a direction which denies our constitutional rights that have been around for hundreds of years, and which puts us as widgets in a larger machine. And it deals with our money and the impact of the Federal Reserve on the creation of money, of creation of debt, with their being able to create money out of nothing and give it to institutions like banks that therefore create a wider wealth gap in the country. It goes to the government not having any fiscal integrity and pyramiding the debt past $34 trillion. It goes to the way in which government spends the money it has, endless wars. It's globalization plus debt plus war equals the end of the United States.
I think a lot about a convention of states, but the danger of that too.
Oh, it's a nightmare today.
Okay, so how do we change the government? Like, obviously, I don't want to change the Bill of Rights. That's not the government.
No, that's right.
So how do you do it? I mean, peacefully, how do you do it?
Right. I mean, that's peacefully. How do we do it?
Is it a convention of states?
At some point, there is going to have to be. However, as you implicitly stated, there's a problem given the way the government's controlled these days. So I think the American people we all love our country. I mean, the reason why I served in Congress for 16 years and why I served in government at various levels, I love America. I still, even with all that we talk about here, I still get a certain feeling when I see the American flag go by during a parade. I love this country. And it might even seem Pollyannish when I say this, but the country that I have intentionally in my head is not the country that actually exists today.
Yeah.
And so how do we put a vision of the country of our dreams together with the country that is? There's a lot of work to be done. And
I think one of the big challenges we're facing right now outside of that is the hyperpolarization, which you brought up early on. And I got to be honest, I don't see a path towards reconciliation. I don't see it being possible.
Well, it's Franklin Roosevelt talked about the science of human relations, and I'll tell you what it is. As I said, I served 16 years in Congress. You have to members of Congress have to treat each other as individuals, not as members of a party, not as liberal, conservative, or whatever, and that is failing to happen. So political parties gain power through polarization. That's how I'll tell you, here's how it works. People want some inside view of Congress. So if you're a Democrat, you go to your Democratic caucus meetings, and they talk about three things. They talk about raising money, the latest polls, and how bad the Republicans are. Now, here's the difference between the two parties. The Republicans in their conference, talk about raising money, the latest polls, and how bad the Democrats are. It's the difference between the two parties. The two parties engage in this polarization in order to gain power and to gain control. The reason why I want to go to Congress is to create an opening here that changes the discussion and shows people there's another path, that shows people we can address each other as individuals and not just as exponents of a political ideology or party. And you don't do it by judging people. This is the worst thing that happens in Congress, when people start to judge each other by virtue of a label or ideology and don't get to know each other as individuals. It's in some ways it's like a big high school, Democrats on one side, Republicans on the other. Well, imagine if one independent was there who had an approach that wasn't polarizing, that looked for the commonalities, because we do have a lot in common as Americans.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.